Welcome to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. Problem solvers have problems too. So here at Behind the Podium, I, Jared Cohen, and my co-host Alexander Ellis discuss the struggles, philosophies, demands, and practices of the coach, or said more broadly, health and wellness practitioner. To provide quality coaching is to enhance someone's life in an everlasting and unfolding way. This is not easy and requires a lot of due diligence and self-mastery on the part of the coach to be able to perform. So without further ado, join us as we dig deeper into the depths of the coach's mind. Welcome back, or welcome to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. I am Jared Cohen with my partner in crime,
Alexander Ellis.
And today we are behind the podium with ourselves, but in
Together.
Person, in the same room for the first time ever in our Behind the Podium recording history.
I know. We're standing behind the podium, the same podium, for the first time ever.
Yeah, this is awesome. It's a evolution. Feels like we're growing up as podcasters.
Oh my God, you're gonna make me cry.
And of course, a shout out to, I guess, our sponsors in a weird way, CrossFit LA, formerly CrossFit Los Angeles, which is soon to become, or in the process of becoming, Oak Park. Mr. Kenny Kane, who has been a guest on the episode, as well as Matt Chapala and Bria White, all coaches of this establishment. We are recording in their headquarters, and so we are very grateful to them and the opportunity to get to use their space and equipment to make this more evolved.
Yeah, it's almost like an incubator, like a lot of cool people doing really cool things are here, and distance has always been an issue for me. If you're not in LA, you don't understand. The 405 is awful. But I hopped in my car this morning and I drove here so that I can also be influenced by magic that is Oak Park.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And in a future episode, we're going to talk about online coaching, which this makes me think of because there is something special about the in-person experience and that energy, like-minded individuals and bodies and spirits and essences in the same place, under the same roof, striving for very similar things with similar whys and missions. And it definitely, I've felt this like boost in energy the past couple of days, just being here and getting to witness the conversations that are happening. For me, I feel much more a part of a community than I have in a while in my coaching career. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, yeah, and actually, speaking of community, today we are talking about the Yoga Tune-Up Teachers Summit that just happened. For me, it was 5 days. For Jared, 4 days. 4 days.
4 days.
4 days in the beautiful Ojai Valley. But I think that whole conference experience summit really exemplifies the power of community. And I know it was reflected back in feedback at the end of the weekend, but how many people, myself included, felt really alone, I would say. I was the only one in my yoga teacher training, in my 200 hour and my 300 hour, who was like really into anatomy, who had a bachelor's degree in science. And, this was the path I wanted to go. And I felt kind of like I had to tamp down my nerdiness because it was too dorky for other people. And the Yoga Tune-Up Teachers group, everybody is like nerdy and dorky in their own way, which is what I love about it. And they truly are my tribe. And so to be able to get together with that many people in the same room, there is no replacement for that. There really isn't. I know I feel, today is Tuesday. We just returned home on Sunday. I slept for 9 hours. And now I'm feeling, super energized and inspired by all the cool things that everybody else is doing and what they got going on.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear from you, actually, what your thoughts are on the evolution of some of the more senior teachers and teacher trainers that you've witnessed for a longer period of time than I have myself. Because I even just had this reflection of like, wow, some of these more senior yoga tune-up teachers, it's really inspiring to see how they are continuing to evolve what they're doing and have these opportunities at these summits to do classes for all the other trainers and teachers, and really experiment and say, hey, I came into Yoga Tune-Up with this background, and then I sort of went in this direction because of that training, and more recently I've had this experience and that's affected me this way. And I just really love that there is this space that encourages that like, okay, we have these basic tools, but for me, more importantly, the way I feel about it and see it is it's like more of this philosophy. And then from there, it's like, okay, now I'm going to teach these classes that allows me to express who I am and how I want to help the world. So again, going back to you, I'm curious if you want to name some names, but just your thoughts on certain teachers that you have known for a longer period of time and just watching them again do their thing, their performance, and were there moments where you're like, man, I'm still so blown away how they continue to evolve and tinker.
Yeah. I think Jared and I were talking before recording started, and I was trying to think like what year my first summit was, and it must have been like 2013 maybe. So I've been to a few, and I feel like, and it could have just been like my deer in the headlights at the first few summits where everybody was like gods, I was like, oh my gosh, these are like titans, they're amazing. And as you get to know everybody, you're like, oh, you're just a person, but you're still a titan, you're still amazing. But everybody has like taken the work and really metabolized it as their own. And so now unique voices and experiences and viewpoints are coming through for so many more people than it seemed like the first time for me to experience. And it almost feels like it's not just about movement anymore. Sarah Court is a teacher here local in LA. She's one of my teachers and dear friends. And so she just finished, I think on Wednesday of last week, her last not internship, but the last requirements for her doctorate in physical therapy. And her class was all about fun and play and how when you do put some sort of boundaries on your creativity, how that makes it even more powerful. And so we did a whole class of building posterior chain strength, and every move was themed to a movie, which was just like so genius.
Great, yeah.
But that idea too about creativity needing boundaries, which is something I've actually been exploring in my own teaching over this past year. And for me, it was theming each month of my classes. And so I picked, 4 things: core, shoulders, hips, and squat. And so each month on rotation is a different theme. So I have a framework, like we're talking shoulders, which then allowed me to, that boundary, focus in on what I wanted to work on, and over the course of a month really improve whatever the topic at hand was, but to see that improvement in my students. So that lesson from Sarah was really, really cool. And that class was insane. It was so much fun. Also, Lily Chandra, who lives in Connecticut, I believe, who is one of the OG Yoga Tune-Up teachers. I think she even got the original OG Golden Alpha Award. And Lily taught a class that was all about posture, and not in the structural way that we think of posture, but really in an energetic way, which I think is not even an idea, but a thing that you can only really experience person to person. I can't pick up on your body language and literally your vibe if we're not in the same room. I know there are some people who are like super high level at that and can, like my animal communicator in Utah. But for the rest of us who are just trying to get in tune with the person in front of us, her lessons of actually listening to your body and listening to what you're feeling rather than intellectually trying to think about what you're feeling was really, really, really super cool, because so many of us as movement educators, coaches, whatever it is, like we're working one-on-one with somebody and trying to improve their life in some way. And even if you approach it from, I want to fix you, you're broken, versus like, you're totally fine the way you are, and let's just play together. Even that mental shift can make a dramatic impact on your interaction with somebody. So I thought that was really super cool. And gosh, there's like so many good classes. What else did we do?
I would say following up on that was Ariel Kiley's Cultivating a Positive Community class and talk. That was fantastic. Totally unbelievable. And for me, like you just said, it really comes back to how this is so much more than movement.
Yes.
It's about coaching, teaching, leading, having an impact, allowing people to live more fulfilling and happy lives. And Ariel's talk reminded me a lot of the Brene Brown information, vernacular, shame versus guilt, and the ways in which we communicate to those that we're working with that send very different messages about shame or guilt. Guilt being more related to behavior that you just executed or behaved in a certain way, versus shame being very identity reflected. I feel shame about who I am versus guilty about what I did. And Ariel just hit on so many important points about how to be this beacon for positivity and how to hold that space and that environment to just continue to, what I felt like was about protecting against shame and the shameful feelings that we might walk around with or bring into classes, and even just commenting on little things that I think as coaches, especially of group classes, we're all guilty of in certain ways. How we like maybe take a shot, maybe we've taken a shot at someone before for coming in late, or kind of poking a little jab at like, hey, we haven't seen you in class, and just remembering the unintended consequences of that and going beyond that in this empathetic realm of really thinking about like, what is someone else dealing with and what are they carrying when they walk into that class. And it's easy for us to get caught up in our own coaching experience and what we're trying to bring to the class and how important that is to us. And so there may be certain things that clients do that then kind of irk us the wrong way, but to really take it back to this higher context, which is like, we're there in service of them. And so much of that comes back to our role in cultivating this positive community that people feel safe within.
Yeah, and like, you make mistakes as a coach. Hopefully not all the time, but stuff happens. And I think I was sharing with you an experience I had in class just recently where I totally, not patronized isn't the word, or maybe it is. Anyways, I said something to a student, like in jest, that I'm still thinking about 3 weeks later. And Ariel provided a framework of like a daily reflection. She called it the suckage journal.
Right.
Of, because stuff happens and you feel bad about it, but like, what are you going to do? And so there was, a series of 5 questions, like, what did I do that sucked today? And what impact or what of my values did that compromise? What do I need to do to resolve it? And maybe that is saying something to the individual. Hey, I'm really sorry how, I said I didn't mean anything by it. I hope we can move on from this, or whatever it is. And what would you do differently in the future? And I think too, the power of writing that down to really process it and get it not out so much, but just to like write it down and process it rather than just angsting over it for weeks like I've been doing, is really helpful because stuff happens. We say stuff in the moment. And when we are trying to cultivate a positive community where people want to be there because they feel great every time they walk in the door, that self-reflection and correction to like rewrite your boat on the path you want to be on is super important.
Yeah, and there's totally something different about a class where you feel good or positive or happy or content and at ease versus a class where it's not so much about those feelings as maybe it's about, well, I know I'm going to learn a lot, or it's like you maybe compartmentalize the positives of that class only within this context of like the thinking space. I go to this class because it's a teacher that knows a lot and I'm pushed in certain ways, but those might all be true, but they are also probably cerebral rationalizations for some of the lack of positive feelings that maybe you're not getting from that class. And I know I've experienced a lot of classes like that. It kind of makes me think about restaurants where the customer service isn't great, but the quality of the food is so great that you're like, I'll just endure like feeling like crap as they sort of the way they talk to me or how they fill this order, and the fact that like there's just not a lot of good positive energy coming from the people that work there. But for whatever the reason is, the food tastes really good. So I make that kind of deal with the devil in a way. And that's just not enough. And it's a big difference from the combination where it's like, hey, how can I provide this fulfillment of feeling as well as this fulfillment of thinking, and then the behavior that is encouraged that sort of bridges those two things together. And Ariel made a great point about her own journey where it's like she's always pretty much been naturally pretty positive and able to cultivate and inspire and bring people together. But she realized that for her, what was lacking was the thinking piece, that like, she didn't feel like she had the biomechanical tools to really encourage or teach these longer lasting principles of change and empowerment and ability. And so that, there's this balance between like, how much am I, and this is actually just reminding me, goes back to our first episode way back when of like the motivator versus the technician. And what does it mean to carry both of those and actually, create enough positivity and feelings of safety and warmth that when you do move in that realm of being a technician, people aren't stunted by their fear of just like being uncomfortable.
I was thinking too about that restaurant analogy because in Davis, California, where I went to school, there was this one Chinese restaurant called Hunan's, and the food was pretty good. The service was awful. They they were not friendly at all. Your water glass would like always be empty, and then when they come fill it up, the water would spill everywhere, and they would just like be rushing you out the door. But it was cheap. It was pretty good. But then you think of like how much time we wasted eating there because it was cheap and good and the service was awful, when you could have gone out and experienced something else that had all of those things that Hunan's was missing. I don't even know if Hunan's is still there, so sorry if they are.
Shout out to Hunan's.
It was delicious. It was filled with MSG. It was so good. And how often, because I've done this too, do we continue to put ourselves through these experiences and then kind of justify it? Well, I'm getting this out of it, or I'm getting that out of it. when really it's not serving you like it should. And the only, or maybe not the only, but one of the things that's keeping you from making a change is just like the fear of the unknown. You know, like, what is it, like love, or the devil you know is better than the one you don't, or something.
Right. Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
but why subject yourself to something you're not stoked about just because you know what to expect? Because who knows, like, the next greatest class or the next most awesome mentor or coach is 2 more people down the line. And if you stay here for this half-assed experience, you'll never know, and you'll never get there.
Yeah, I often think about this a lot as it relates to CrossFit gyms in particular, because that's my background. Just how many people are in gyms that is not really providing that optimal experience, but they just, one, they don't know any better of what else is out there, that like their frame of reference is limited to that experience, in addition to the fact that even though there might be something greater out there, that comes with a lot of change, right? Of like, having to go to a new community and get acquainted with different coaches and a different, even just kind of cultural practices of like, oh, this is how they do things. And so you're, like you said, we make these rationalizations with ourselves about like, well, I guess I'll put up with this because I don't want to have to endure what is required to actually go through the tunnel of that change. And so thinking about Simon Sinek, who has been like a godfather of this show in some ways. Doesn't even know. His books Start With Why. He makes the distinction between leaders and those that lead. Leaders hold positions of power or influence versus those that lead inspire us. And it's really interesting how just that little distinction creates so many subsequent changes down the chain. And that sometimes like we're not even aware of. It's like, oh yeah, they're a leader because they're in this role. Like they lead this thing that's going on. And we may refer to them similar to someone else, but that someone else is someone that we actually feel bonded to and loyal to, because there is this aspect of inspiration and charisma that transcends just the title, which we've also talked about before. What do you refer to yourself as, and in some ways, how do you then live up to that title? And a lot of the inspiration behind this podcast is wanting to shine a light on the coaching and teaching process that is really committed to some level of self-mastery, because of how important it is to have that as a starting place and as a continual endeavor to then help those that we want to help, and that we're involved in this process of reflection, and we're involved in this process of like, no, that wasn't great. How can I do this differently? That sucked. And man, I'm feeling uncomfortable about this. I'm worried about the impression I'm making. All these thoughts that are ultimately difficult to bear and require vulnerability to take on is ultimately in the pursuit of being someone that leads, i.e. inspires, versus just merely being a leader or a person in the front of the class, or the person in this with this kind of power differential of, the doctor versus the patient, even the nurse versus the patient, the pharmacist versus the person buying the meds, and how we become subjected to those relationships of like, of really handing over the trust.
I'm thinking too, the power of being, again, in a room with a ton of people. And this community of Yoga Tune-Up teachers might not be, the listeners' community, but I so strongly encourage you to find a group of people that you can hang out with. because I know for us, part of, trying to make this podcast was having enough conversations where we're like, I don't really have it figured out. I wonder if other people do. Can we talk about that? And one of the most comforting and a little bit frustrating things for me at this summit were how many people came up to me and, made some comment of, oh, you're doing this so great, like I suck, or you're doing this so great and I could never do that. And how all of us, when you're out teaching, it can feel kind of lonely, just like this power differential, like you're talking about. Sure, you're with students every week, but you're not on the same level. You can't always, if you stand up there and say, oh my God, I suck and this is so horrible all the time, they're never going to come back because they're going to have no faith in you. But that at every level, no matter if we're teaching, one class to 5 people, or we're teaching international trainings to rooms full of people all over the world, we all have those moments or those things where we go, man, I really suck at that. And to just realize, and I said it to the group and people multiple times, guys, we all feel the same way. And so if we're all feeling like we're sucking, hey, guess what? We're not sucking. You're awesome. And that just is like the burden of being a person who cares and who's super creative. Like, you're going to have those times where you're like, man, I don't know anything. But you do know a lot. So maybe those are the times where we pull out our suckage journal and write down why we think we suck. And then once you've written it and committed it to paper, you realize how ridiculous it is. But just to know, like, you're not alone. Michael Jackson said it right, okay? We all have those times where we feel inadequate. And the quicker, process it, feel it, sit with it, and know that that's a lie. It's not true.
Yeah, and 100% your point that being able to take a step back and realize that a lot of these feelings come from carrying the heavy burden of really wanting to help and make a positive impact.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, again, is like where this whole thing is coming from, that we're unpacking with Behind the Podium, is like, it is a heavy burden to go deep into this stuff that requires you to have enough self-reflection to sort of ask, like, how well am I doing this thing mm-hmm. that is contingent upon somebody else getting better in some way. Mm-hmm. And that's and to me, like, it's a serious thing that is different, I feel like, than I don't know, I don't want to put down other jobs, but other jobs where at least it's not so one-to-one in terms of like how your product is really about the effect that it's having on someone else. Mm-hmm. And personally, it's like always irked me when I hear how people maybe fall into certain like teaching professions because like they didn't know what else to do. Mm-hmm. Just because to me it's like, oh man, like this is not something to just fall into, like there's a lot of responsibility here. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that that's part of the struggle, and to your point, then that's okay. Like these feelings are normal. And there is an important process for all of us to go through, and then to help whomever we're working with as well, of like the separation, the decoupling between who we are and like what we do, and the process and practice of what we're doing, to sort of be critical of our skills that are manifested in our job, but to still maintain so much space for that self-love and compassion. Mm-hmm. And know that struggle of like how easy it is to become over-identified with what we do. Mm-hmm. And then lose sight, and also just lose that self-confidence in our identity because we're becoming overly critical.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's just an American thing or like a Western thing to be so defined by your job. Like what's the first
For sure.
question when you meet somebody? Oh, what do you do?
Yeah, it is very, very interesting, actually, how much our culture overlaps those two
Mm-hmm.
of what do you do with who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the ways in which we then have to kind of like separate other parts of our lives from this like thing that is our greater identity.
Mm-hmm. I just think too. So I have family in Missouri, and every time I go back, I'm like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a yoga teacher, which like does not at all encapsulate what it is that I do. But I like, how do you answer that? Like, I inspire others' curiosity. You know, like how I'm like the Miss Frizzle of yoga. Like, I don't know how to answer that. And I think that there are other people who have the same thing because these labels are easy, right? When you say, oh, I teach yoga already, like people are formulating an opinion about what it is that you do, which would be a lot easier to describe, I guess. Or maybe that's just my own insecurity about getting to wear spandex every single day. I don't know.
Yeah, it's this weird thing of like, I feel the same awkwardness of telling someone what I do and then feeling sort of boxed in upon that title. And then like all the time, spending way too much time sort of like maneuvering like the different ways I can describe something, and maybe sometimes going too far in the direction of like being so ambiguous that it at least allows me to sort of feel free in the description and perhaps allow for elaboration if that's requested versus just like okay, whatever.
Which I would feel like, especially with you finishing up your master's degree, like how easy it would be. Oh, I'm a sports psychologist.
Right, except the fact that legally I can't use that.
Even with a degree?
Yeah, because it's the word psychology. Well, I guess it varies a little bit state to state, but more specifically, the word psychologist is protected
in California
legally. No, in most places, and so you can only use that word if you have your doctorate. So even like, I mean, and there's a lot of, and this is where it gets even grayer of like, I don't know what the legalities are in relation to the word therapist, but there's a lot of therapists, like even in the word clinician, like that's another loaded term, but oftentimes clinician refers more to licensure or the discussion of more, I guess, diagnostic related criteria. And so the three main distinctions for people that don't know, you have psychotherapist, you have psychologist, and then you have psychiatrist. So the psychotherapist is somebody that also did some master's program. Most of the time it's marriage and family therapy, a master, an MFT. And those are people that are practicing more traditional clinical therapy, but without the doctorate aspect of education. So they too really can't even call themselves a psychologist, but they might probably do that from time to time. And then you have the psychologists who either got their PhD or their PsyD. And then you have the psychiatrist, which is not only the sort of clinical doctorate, but that includes the medical doctorate, because now that is incorporating this whole pharmaceutical space. So yeah, it becomes really tricky, and it opens up a whole nother can of worms about words. Another can of worms about words.
A can of words?
A can of words that, again, of just like how you're defining yourself, how you're labeling yourself. And for me, what comes up more is like this balance or relationship between like, what does that mean to you versus what it means to someone else. And so, especially, I mean, even in the many internships I've done, it's just inevitable that someone will be like, oh yeah, this is the sports psychologist. And it's like, okay.
No, you can't say that.
Yeah, right,
no,
right.
You can't say
It
that.
gets crazy, like those little things. But it's another thing where sports psychology is actually in this weird place because unlike counseling, for instance, I'm trying to think of other domains within the field of psychology, sports psychology still doesn't have a licensure aspect to it. Mm-hmm. So it continues to exist more in a gray area, and you probably see there are a lot of people out there that are potentially using the title sports psychologist that maybe shouldn't be. So in some ways, like graduating with my master's in sports psychology, it only opens up more doors of potential ambiguity because I can't really use...
It's like nebulosity?
Nebulosity. Yeah, so you see a lot of people in the field, this is a big discussion, those that don't have their doctorate, sort of constant discussion of like what are the titles. The Applied Association of Sports Psychology, also known as ASP, is going through a whole re-certification process right now and talking about just different titles they're trying to assign to this certification to be a part of this body of practitioners that some are only master's degree education and others are like full-blown psychologists, clinicians. And so one of the more common titles is mental skills coach, but then again, it's like...
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
So basically, all of us.
All of us.
In every community. I have no idea what to call ourselves.
Yeah.
So why don't we stop asking people that question? Which is one of the things I do like about the Yoga Tune-Up Summit, because you show up already with the assumption that they're a movement educator. They wouldn't be there. And so I didn't ask people what do you do? I'm like, where do you live? And do you teach classes? And which is sort of along the same lines, but to me it's a more interesting conversation because there's already this assumption about what you do.
Right. And I brought this up with Steph when we had Steph Gaudreau on the podcast that I recently had this professional development seminar where the speaker was talking about Simon Sinek's work, Start With Why, and posing the hypothetical scenario of meeting someone and instead of asking, what do you do, ask, why do you do what you do? Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting when we go back to this greater context of culture of if you asked that to people, they would almost become a little defensive, right? Because it's just one, it's sort of foreign to be at, if you just met someone, you're like, hi, I'm Jared, why do you do what you do?
Why do you get up in the morning?
Whoa, what are you accusing me? Did I do something wrong?
Right.
And so again, it just goes back to our sort of conditioning around defining ourselves based on more tangible outputs and behaviors. And Simon Sinek's point that the why is feeling oriented. And those parts of the brain are harder to put into words for the very nature that they don't exist with words, that we make decisions more often in a feeling state and then are left to rationalize and articulate those feelings with thought that doesn't necessarily add up as well. And I think romantic relationships are a great example of this, right? When someone's like, why do you like them? And you're like, oh, God.
I haven't really thought about that.
Yeah, it's and you have, but you're especially with people that maybe don't, maybe they're not as much of a fan of your significant other. And they're like, what's so great about that? And you're just you don't get it, how do I guess I can't really, if you don't get it, it's maybe not going to even be worthwhile to try and jam sentences together to make you to get this thing that for me is very is much more emotional and a felt experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think too. I'm just thinking back on the summit and sessions we had. There's not a whole lot of feeling going on in the world in general, and how if we were more open to feeling stuff and exploring why do I hate my job? Oh, maybe it's because this isn't according to my why and I should change it. It's we're a whole society of people just doing things without any understanding behind them. So if we were able to ask people, why do you do what you do? I think it'd have to be like a radical shift.
Yeah.
But total. But I know that I gravitate towards people who have that sort of figured out already. And also, as you and I mean, just over the course of doing this podcast, have become so aware to the person who is living according to their why and the one who isn't. And you can just feel it.
Right.
Right away.
And that's a nice framework to have too, this understanding of why versus what versus how, and then becoming cognitively comfortable with those distinctions, that then you can interact with people and meet people maybe for the first time, and then sense like where they are in this continuum and how they convey themselves, and then even reflecting like, why do I feel this certain way around someone but feel this way around someone else? And Laura Ahrens, who we had on, like, she was just mind-blowing in terms of like someone that is just like so embodied with her why. And like and yeah, I mean, totally the definition of inspiring. Like so much to say, and then also so honest about the struggle that is trying to live in accordance with that and that mission, and wanting to like constantly like do better in that way, but realizing the daily struggles and so much of our environment that often also works against us, whether it's technology or social media. You know, there's so many things that are positive, but that can easily kind of take over in being this constant state of stimulus, so that we continue to become further away of like the reflection of how we're feeling and how we're experiencing something, because it's so easy to just, I guess, tune out to something else versus tune in to something that isn't as transparent.
Yep, all true. I think if anything from this summit, and I know, we're going to talk about online education, which is the way of the future for sure, in my opinion. But regardless of where you get your coaching, where you get your movement, even where you get your groceries, because you don't have to go see people to do that anymore. Not here in LA. You can have it delivered by a robot.
Shout out to Thrive Market. If you guys want to sponsor us, big fan.
Big fans. But the importance of finding community and making sure that community makes you feel good. Just going to a place because it's a place to go to, even though you feel gross after, isn't the same as having a positive community that uplifts you, that inspires your curiosity, that supports you in all the things you want to do. Like, that is super important wherever you are. And the community can be small. Maybe it's, one or two other people. Maybe it's, how many people are there? Like 95 other people. Just find people, because that will make you feel so much less alone in your struggles and in your hopes and your dreams. And I know this seems like, oh my gosh, it can't be that huge, but it really was. It's like a glimpse in time, and also like a pat on the back. Like, you got this, okay? So go forth out into the world and continue to do what you do, knowing that this group of people has got your back.
Yeah, we'll end here. I'll just say I continue to be inspired and impressed with the community that Jill Miller, the creator of Yoga Tune-Up, has created, continues to lead and nurture, as it relates to, specifically as it relates to the teachers. And I've done various certifications and various educational programs that in no way resemble that kind of community and threaded connection of the teachers that are like in this similar fight. And it's super special to to know that there is that tribe, and there is a place where you can feel like your friends got your back.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So sometimes we end with a quote. I'm going to end with this acronym that I heard recently.
I thought you were going to ask me some rapid fires. I was like, oh no, I'm not prepared, Jared.
So all about, we talked a lot about feeling and growing your feeling muscles. And so I recently heard this, that faith, Faith, can stand for finding answers in the heart. I thought that was really cool.
I like that.
So, without further ado, we will bid you a farewell.
Without further ado, bid you adieu.
That's what I was going to go for, but then I was like, is that right? Are those spelled the same way? Adieu and...
Adieu is French.
Adieu? Yeah. Thank you for all the continued listening. This is continues to be a blast to explore these deeper conversations about providing service to another, and we are very, again, grateful and excited to be in-house here at Oak Park in Santa Monica, and look forward to getting to have others in the room, also in person, to expand this greater community of coaches and healthcare practitioners.
And if you're enjoying the show, we would so appreciate if you would head on over to iTunes and left us a review. It's a way for the show to get out to more people, and also for us to know what you think.
Yes.
So please go on and do that. Share the episode with someone who needs to hear, and stop going to Hunans. Coming out with us on social media, we are at Behind the Podium Behind the Podium on Instagram.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then
Behind the Podium podcast on Facebook. And show notes and our pretty pictures live at BehindThePodiumPodcast.com. Take care, and we'll see you guys next time.
Until next time. Hey guys, thanks for listening to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. If you have enjoyed what you listened to, head over to iTunes and leave us a review. More information on each episode and the podcast in general can be found at BehindThePodiumPodcast.com. We'll catch you next time.